Good morning.
Good morning.
Those are getting hot again. Happy Father's Day.
Happy Father's Day.
Thank you. Thank you. Please take some time today to honor your father, embodied or otherwise, rascal or sage. It's in probably both on some level. Before I start the talk this morning, I wanted to just remind people that the COVID procedures are continuing to evolve, and Oregon's getting close to pulling the plug on masks and requirement of masks and those kinds of things. So just pay attention to the digest. If you're not on the digest, you can sign up for it later, but I'm thinking it's quite likely that next Sunday there would be some significant shift in the way that we're operating. It sounds like we're pretty close on our vaccination percentages and things, so don't want that to be a surprise for folks. As it does evolve, we'll continue to have outside seating and opportunity to be able to moderate or mediate how you feel comfortable being here at the temple. I think even with a lot of vaccination and rates really going down, we've been in this for a year and a half, so there's going to be a lot of care that's necessary to ease back into how it is that we are together in closer proximity. I'm getting a funny kind of feedback. I sort of feel like God when I'm talking. I mean, just in terms of sound. It's like coming back. Also next week, we will celebrate our anniversary, the anniversary of the founding of Buddha Eye Temple, 17 years. Many of you were there at that time. It's hard to believe that it's been 17 years since then. And we oftentimes celebrate it a little bit earlier in June because people take off for vacation and things, although this is really the weekend that it happened. I believe the 28th was the ceremony 17 years ago, the 28th of June. But we've oftentimes had it earlier, like I say, because we want people to be able to come. But people aren't going very many places this year, so it will be easier to have that celebration. We usually have lunch and those kind of things. We won't do that next week. We'll have some refreshments and an invitation for people to stay for fellowship. So I hope you're able to make it next week. Another thing that will happen, and this is something that I like to speak about this morning at length, is another icon for our main altar will arrive this week, and it's a Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, Kuan Yin, Kanzeon Kanjizai in Japanese. And this form of the Kuan Yin is the 1,000-armed Kuan Yin you may have seen before, where the Kuan Yin is sitting like this in a meditation and has this array of arms, and in each hand there is an eye. Right at the center of the palm, and is an iconography about the activity of compassion animated by wisdom. I'll speak more about that next week and probably at length for a couple more decades. So you'll get to know more about that, but that icon will arrive this week. And so next week, along with the celebration, there will also be the dedication of that icon. There's a special ritual that we go through together. So again, I hope you're able to be here for that. But it does beg this question: what are all these icons about? Why do we bother to draw a picture of the Buddha or to carve a carving and to put them on an altar and burn incense, etc.? What we know of the most ancient practices of the followers of the Buddha is that they didn't make images of the Buddha. The most ancient are the footprints. There are some places where in India and in Sri Lanka where they still have temples that are built around the impressions of the Buddha's feet in the ground. And said that this was he stepped somewhere where the earth was very soft and people protected that area and then made it into a shrine. So that became an image. You can see very beautiful images of Buddha's footprint as one of the ways of representing the Buddha. Here in front of Buddha Eye's gate, there's a stone pillar with one Buddha's foot there. But over time, it became the practice to create images of the Buddha and of Bodhisattvas, of various beings that show up in sutras and other places. And I think that for many Westerners, there is some foundational kind of uncomfortable quality about it. We're very attracted to it, but also uncomfortable with it. And that has a lot to do with our own history through Western spirituality. Western spirituality, very loosely speaking about that. Just if we talk about the Abrahamic faiths and what moved through Northern Africa and Europe and became the dominant religious paradigm within the Americas. That we do have a kind of, we're very attracted and also a little nervous about these images. And we're in a society that is completely reckless with images. Unfathomably reckless. We see more images in one day than a human a couple hundred years ago would have probably seen in their whole lifetime. I mean, images, something that's created and put forward for you to see. I was looking quickly to see some estimates on how many pieces of advertisement the average American sees in a day now. 4,000 to 10,000. Wow. You know, doesn't mean necessarily we see them like we sit there and we look at them, but they pass through our consciousness in some way, whether we're aware of them or not. We don't really think about images so strongly as being harmful or not harmful, as being supportive or not supportive. I mean, we might get down and say, I really don't like to watch horror movies. I don't want to have that inside my head. It's like, okay, that makes sense. We don't think of them quite in the same way we think about food. If you think about food, you say, well, what I put into my body becomes my body. And so what does it mean to eat health, in a healthy way? And when we think of images, we say, oh, well, no, it's just an image. It's just a picture. Right? But actually what we are taking in through images deeply affects us, deeply affects our spiritual well-being. And I don't mean to just be a teetotaler here. But what I mean by reckless is that we don't think about it. We're just driving around within a pretty powerful vehicle, not paying very close attention about what it is that we might be running into. And so our nervousness around images and also our recklessness with images brings us to an interesting place when we're thinking about what is this practice of veneration of icons, where, again, we carve a statue of Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva or have one carved, and then we place it in this honored place within the temple where it may be for hundreds of years. In your own home altar, you may have an image of the Buddha, or you may like to look at images or like Thangka paintings that from the Vajrayana, Tibetan Vajrayana tradition. Very beautiful, so detailed, all kinds of different facets of awakening shown to us in a form which people in those lineages use deeply for their own practice of awakening through image. So what's that about? I think one of the really core messages of paying attention to images, of paying attention to form, is that form is sacred. It's spiritually significant. It's not just something to get around or through or by or transcend. It's not just pointing at something. Images are offering us a doorway, a deep and profound doorway. If we think about what it takes to see, actually what it takes to see, hear, smell, taste, touch, or think. When I'm talking about images today, I'm talking about visual images, but actually all of our consciousness operates the same way. The way that it happens through seeing also happens through feeling, happens through thinking, happens through all of our sense gates. But if we just talk about it in terms of seeing for simplicity, what does it take to see something? It's a massive undertaking for phenomena to appear to us. If we talk about visual phenomena that we locate in a material world, again picking on the glass, to see the glass, this takes a phenomenal amount of activity. There has to be light. The light's bouncing off of something. We could call it a cup, but there is some light refracted. There's an exchange with our eyes. There's nerve impulses. There's some assembling of something in our visual cortex. Now I'm just talking in a kind of like physical sense or medical type of sense. It's very mysterious. We don't actually know how that happens. All of our ideas about a cup, all of our experiences with a cup, all the stories about a cup, about water, those are all playing into the way that the image appears. And what we think of as being an inside world that is a perceiver and an outside world which is a perceived breaks down very quickly. What is here in my being and what I think is out there in the world are not separate. The act of seeing, or right within the seeing itself, the total interdependence is present. You know, when I used to teach high school, and that was so fun. I loved teaching high school. And I got to teach philosophy with seniors. And it was just one of the highlights of my life. And one of the things I love to do is, you know, if a tree falls in the woods and no one's there to hear it, you know, is there a sound, right? So, and I would get the class kind of whipped up into a froth about that question. On purpose, you know, like someone would say, well, you know, it's a sound, and whether there's someone to hear it there or not, you know, there's still vibrations in the air. And I would say, oh, so you think sound is vibrations? And they'd be, well, yeah, that's what sound is. It's vibrations. You know, it's vibrations in the air. I say, oh, okay. How does it feel to be on the wrong side of this question? You know, I would say things like that, just to whip them up a little bit. But it was on purpose. Once you got the engine going, oh boy, they would go for days. They would have like arguments in the hallway about this. And most of us, once we get past the intensity of our teenage years, are not interesting enough people to keep that question going. We solve it in some way, and then we just move on. Right? We solve it in some way, and it's appropriate. We probably need to find other questions. But what makes that question so interesting is, right from the beginning, it's positing an outside and an inside. It's playing with that idea that there's an outside and inside, that sound, color, taste, thoughts, that those are, you could separate them in some way from an inside experience to an outside experience. This is exactly what the Western intellectual and spiritual tradition has struggled with, for a long time, is an essential split between spirit and materiality. Right? That there is spirit and there's material, and the material is just material, right? And if we want to talk about religion, we want to talk about spiritual things, then all this material stuff is kind of in the way. Let's get around it somehow. Let's get it through it. At best, it's a symbol, right? At best. But really, mostly, we shouldn't need any of it. We carry that in us. I'm not saying that you believe that or that I believe it, but I definitely carry that pattern within my own way of thinking. If you grow up in a North American environment, I don't think you can avoid it. Consciousness is like an aperture, is like a pupil of your eye, through which this non-separation is immediately and continuously functioning. If you think about this, very interesting, this black dot in the middle of your eyeball, which is a hole. Right? It's a completely receptive hole. There's nothing. I mean, yeah, there's lens in there and that kind of stuff, but if you just think about the whole quality of it, it's a space, it's an aperture. And the non-separation is continually functioning there. That's true with touch, that's true with taste, that's true with thinking, it's true with everything that makes up how it is that we experience phenomena. And so this is the basis for why an icon is important, or how it is that an icon functions within a spiritual life or religious life within a Buddhist practice. When you see a Buddha or a Bodhisattva that is represented in an icon, It's not just that you are seeing something, right? It's not just a passive experience. You are being met. The icon meets you as you see. That aperture through which phenomena are appearing constantly. The Buddha, the Bodhisattva is right there. And centers you in the truth of interbeing. It's a very fundamental teaching of Buddhism that there is nothing that exists apart with its own independent self-nature. Everything is intertwined in creating each other. So to see, just the act of seeing, is an act of mutual creation or an act of mutual being. Right? To see a Buddha, the Buddha meets us there to remind us, or the Buddha meets us there as a representative of that teaching of interbeing. The Buddha's body itself is the awakening of that interbeing, or the awakening to that interbeing. This is a different way of understanding than the way that we normally think of the word symbol. When we use the word symbol, we oftentimes think of a symbol as being some kind of form. It could be written on a piece of paper, or it could be a statue, or it could be a letter, it could be anything, right? And that it stands in for, or it's a reference for something else. This is the way we oftentimes think about symbol. So if we say, I can't see the teaching stick directly right now, so I could write teaching stick on a piece of paper and show it to you. You could read teaching stick, and you could remember about this stick, that you know what it is. So when we use the word symbol, that's oftentimes the way that we're using it. It's like there is a symbol which stands for something else that we could know. But there's another way to think about symbol, and that is that a symbol is like an appearance of something which stands for something which cannot be apprehended, cannot be caught, cannot be seen, cannot be grasped. You see the difference there? So if you said, if you talked about a symbol for the depths of the ocean, or even if you had been down in like one of those, what are those things they put people in? It's like a canister. There's like big thick steel walls, and they lower you down into the ocean. Even if you had been way, way, way down there, right? You can't grasp the depth of the ocean, right? You could have experienced something there. So the symbol for that would be a little bit different. It's not something you say, oh yeah, I know what that is, and there's been a reference for it. But you could have a symbol that tells you something about the importance of the depth of the ocean, even though you can't really comprehend it or hold it in your mind. Perhaps you would pick a mermaid or a serpent, or what was that show my kids really liked? Nemo. Could be Nemo. So that kind of a symbol is different. It's mysterious, it's wonderful, wonderful, full of wonder. There's a co-reflection of what can be seen and what cannot be seen that's happening in that type of a symbol. There's the surface and the depths, which are intermingled or playing with each other. This is the kind of symbol that is appearing in icons. It's what makes them so magical. You have to bring that mind to it. If you don't, this is a piece of wood, right? That has a shape. But if you bring a certain kind of appreciation to it, a certain kind of veneration, right, which we'll get to here in a moment, then the way in which you see that image and the way that that image centers in you and through you and centers you in the truth of interbeing, that begins to take on a different kind of quality of symbol. It's one of the reasons that we have a mirror here in front of the Buddha on this altar. This is like a reminder that when we're looking at that image of the Buddha, this Buddha is a reflection, is reflecting back to us something from a place that we can't see. And it calls the same thing out of us. What is the reflection from our deep heart and mind, which is coming out into the world? And in this way, embodiment, personification happens on a very fundamental level. Oftentimes people will say, oh, there's a Buddha. The Buddha is awakened one. So that's just to remind us about awakening. Awakening is the real thing. The Buddha is the symbol. And they want to dispense with the Buddha and just talk about awakening. But the personification of awakening is who the Buddha is. And that doesn't just happen on some surface level. That happens deep, 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 deep down. And so it is important that the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas show up to us in our world in a form that we can understand. It doesn't mean that's the only way they can show up. They can show up many, many ways, in many different worlds. In fact, they do. But for our world, right, centered on human consciousness, the personification through human figure happens in that fundamental way. It doesn't mean there can't be other figures, but that human figure becomes centrally important. In Mahayana Buddhism, we talk about the three bodies of Buddha. There's the Dharma body of Buddha, the bliss body of Buddha or fulfillment body of Buddha, and the manifest body of Buddha. They're known as the Dharmakaya, the Sambhogakaya, and the Nirmanakaya. And there's lots and lots of, you can't quite say theology in Buddhism, but maybe we'll just use the word, lots and lots of theology, many, many books, many, many, many teachings about like the theology of that, the philosophy, the Buddhist philosophy around it. The reason I bring it up here is because it points to something about this embodiment, about a form appearing that we can interact with. Of course, the Dharma body of the Buddha is completely ungraspable. It is all pervasive. It runs through and is everything that we could ever point to as being anything. It is the cosmos. This is Dharmakaya, the law body of the Buddha. Did anyone ever read the book Monkey, or watch the Chinese cartoons of Monkey or reenactments of Monkey? It's very famous Chinese mythology about this troublemaker monkey. Those of you who may have liked Dragon Ball. Dragon Ball was very loosely based on these stories of Monkey. And anyway, so there's one scene in Monkey where the monkey's getting beat up by Buddha a little bit because he's a big troublemaker. And Monkey's like, I can get away from you, because one of Monkey's powers is he can do a somersault and appear anywhere. That's like one of his spiritual powers. So he does a somersault and he goes to the very edges of the cosmos, like the farthest possible conceivable place where there are 5 pillars, these 5 massive pillars. And because he's Monkey, he takes a leak on the pillars. And then he circles and he comes back to the Buddha and he says, see, Buddha, I can get away from you, easy as that. And I even put a marking on it. And then the Buddha holds up his hand and he's, it's wet with a monkey's urine. This is the Dharmakaya body of the Buddha, right? You couldn't get away from it, right? The Nirmanakaya body of the Buddha, or the manifest body of Buddha, the present body of Buddha, is a shape and a form that appears in the limited world of phenomena and teaches us. In the most direct sense, it is the Buddha Shakyamuni who appeared in India 2,500 years ago, had a human body, or was a human body. And then the Sambhogakaya this reflective body of the Buddha. So many teachings within the sutras about light. Right? That's because this body of the Sambhogakaya is a reflective body, is a mirror body. It is a body that isn't definable and capturable in form, yet appears through forms again and again and again, comes and goes. So this kind of philosophical understanding about what is a Buddha, what is the form of a Buddha, what is the body of a Buddha, becomes important when we think about what are we doing when we're venerating. Right? Now I know this is all getting a little bit heady, right? But it's good to consider. You know, maybe in the most fundamental sense, just to realize we don't know what a Buddha is. We're always trying to nail it down. Right? But this body of the Buddha will not be captured in that way. And that's not the point of an icon. The point of an icon is not so that we can capture the body of a Buddha or the form of a Buddha. It's so the body of the Buddha can meet us. The personification of the Buddha can teach us. Right? Or of Bodhisattvas. So when an image like this that's been carved in a studio in China is been shipped, it's been shipped for a really long time. It's taking a lot of time to get things from China. I just got the word at the end of last week. It's been like 2.5 months, no word. Just flight arrival, but I don't know what flight to where or anything else. You know, computer has upsides and downsides. It was testing my patience to be able to track the thing. Well, not be able to track the thing, but think I was supposed to be able to track the thing. Track the thing. Anyway, but I got the confirmation last week that it will arrive on Tuesday. And so when that arrives, we will unpack the icon and clean it and prepare it, and we'll place it here on the altar. And then there will be a ritual in which the image will become an icon. Right? The statue will move from being a statue, like we bought it, to being an icon. This is commonly referred to as an eye-opening ceremony. But it's a very interesting question to ask. Whose eyes are being opened? We normally think about that ritual and we say, oh, we're opening the eyes of the Buddha, right? We open the eyes. This kind of idea that there's this vessel, and then in the opening of the eyes of that Buddha, the Buddha becomes an icon because the spirit of the Buddha can enter into the icon. This way of understanding stinks a little bit to me. It stinks of the separation between materiality and spirit. Right? We have two words. They have different emphases, but they're not really different. So to open the eyes of the Buddha isn't just to insert something into the Buddha that is otherwise unimportant. It is opening the eyes of the Buddha, which is opening our own eyes. To be able to meet a Buddha, we have to open our eyes. The unity of those three bodies of the Buddha is what appears there. And in fact, the ritual, which has a lot of esoteric parts to it, which I won't go into, is an enactment of the oneness of those three bodies of the Buddha. How those three bodies of the Buddha are never separable. We can never separate them. That's ritually enacted. That's what it means to open the eyes of a Buddha, or to open the eyes of an assembly to a Buddha. And for teaching to be able to flow. Is not just a piece of wood. And we need a piece of wood to remind us that nothing is just a piece of wood. There's no such thing as, it's just a. That's your bullshit. No such thing. And so as we gather our own heart of veneration together, then what has always been worthy of our veneration becomes apparent in a new way. And our vision is changed. I know I've told the story many times about, I wish I could remember his name. I wasn't planning to talk about it, otherwise I would have looked it up. He's an artist in England. And he carves these miniature carvings. And when I say miniature, I don't mean like the size of a dime. I mean like half the size of a piece of rice, or even smaller. And he has all these really joke carvings, like he has a camel that sits inside the eye of a needle. It's a little carving of a camel inside the eye of a needle. A lot of things like that. He said that one time he was working on a little Alice in Wonderland Alice, and he was describing his method. And he said how careful he had to be controlling his breathing, because when he's carving, or especially painting at that scale, he said he has to touch the carving in between his heartbeats, because the heartbeat is too big that you can't get any precision. So he slows his heart rate down. He's like a yogi. His heart rate down, and then he paints in this way. And he said he was painting this Alice in Wonderland, and he sucked in. He made a mistake, and he kind of breathed in quickly, and he's gone. She just went inside somewhere. Anyway, he has some things on YouTube. If you look up like ridiculously small sculptures, British, whatever, I'm sure he will come up. He was on. This made its way through some talk, like I don't know, those morning programs or whatever, maybe 6-7 years ago. When they interviewed him, he said something really, really profound. He has a lot of learning disabilities, and he said as he was growing up, he said they always made me feel small. He said, I went through school. Everybody made me feel small. And I'm here to prove there's no such thing as small. And that's like the whole inspiration of his artwork. Yeah? This tiny, tiny, tiny thing, totally significant. What kind of heart, what kind of approach, what kind of living can make that true? That's what we're talking about when we're talking about veneration. It's not a worship of something that's more powerful than you, hoping to gain favor. It's a meeting with something very powerful. To center in, to be centered by, through lifting up, through making offerings. See, we regard that image in a different way when we take care of it as sacred. We take care of it as being deeply important. And as we do the kind of things that we do through veneration, making offerings, prostrating, etc., we're receiving the body of the Buddha. We're receiving the body of enlightenment, receiving the body of enlightening, of the path of awakening that is the Bodhisattvas and Buddhas. So once an image is made an icon, then it is cared for in a very careful way. They can also be decommissioned. But we know that really they could never be commissioned or decommissioned. But we still could commission them and decommission them. Right? We need to be able to do that. We make offerings every day, and we keep them in the high place, we keep them clean, and we meet the Buddha and the Bodhisattva there again and again and again. So I want to encourage you. I've said a lot today. I hope some of it was helpful in your own regard of images. But regardless of if anything I said today made sense or was helpful or not, I just want to ask you to come to images with a reverence, And again, those images are not just in your visual world. They're also in your smell and your taste and your touch, your hearing, and in your feeling, and in the thoughts and deep places of your own interior world. When I say image, I'm talking about all of that. And that is something that icons can do with us, for us. Any questions or comments? Hi.
So, as I'm listening to you, I realize I have many icons in my house. Things that mean a lot to me. One being a little angel with a bell that I found at the bottom on the floor of an estate sale. This old lady who passed away, and everything like a tornado after the sale went on. And I was like, this is what's left of us, you know, this is like my last photograph or something, you know, impermanence, you know, and so she sits there. And I have the bones of friends who I've been with who died in boxes, you know, after cremation. And at the same time, a big part of my path is relinquishment. And it seems to me like I've set up altars to all of these things. And I don't know how to decommission them or commission them, decommission them, or, I mean, they're in a lot of ways to me, there is not just anything, you know what I mean? But what is the opposite of that where we pass it on? I mean, we're not going to keep any of this stuff, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think you understand my question.
Yeah. Fire. That's the central methodology. It wouldn't have to be fire, but it is one that's mostly used. So in the process of a form that has come together, in any form that comes together will also disband. And so in what way is that disbanding not a destruction of what it is that we've come to meet through that form, but is the truth of that form in its disassembly, or its relinquishing its form. So sometimes that happens through a kind of a process without our intervention, and then sometimes happens through a process with our intervention. So just like we have the ritual to recognize image as an icon and then to work with it, and I said we have a way to decommission it. The decommissioning isn't like, oh, you're just a piece of wood now again. It's actually, oh, you are a piece of wood, and what would we do with that? In what way would it the next phase of that coming apart? How could we do that with the honor that brings us to the same place that encountering the icon brings us to? That's kind of the key. So it's done with reverence, and it's done just as when we lose a friend or a loved one through death. If we don't know how to relinquish their form, we're crushed. But if we relinquish their form without acknowledging the deep importance of their form, then we're on our way to inhumanity. So you can bring them to the temple. Yeah, really. That's in the Asian cultures, in Japan, particularly, that's what I know. The temple is a really important place for people to bring things that they have and have been important, and they know they can't just like throw them in the garbage, but something needs to happen. And like in my teacher's temple, there's this really creepy corner in this one place with these old dolls. And I don't think he knows what the other stuff, the more religious stuff, like what to do with them. There's like a protocol, but I think he just hasn't quite figured out how to help these dolls go to their next place. But the dolls oftentimes, they carry so much power You know, there's a reason there's like a lot of horror movies about dolls and stuff, because the image that's there, and that just the kind of communication that I've been talking about today, that's happening on a real deep level. So so to take care of those things with intention is important.
So when you say bring to the temple, does that mean in a sense of the reverence and the respect of, maybe I could spread some ashes under the tree?
We also have this altar is made to place ashes inside. So we have many people's ashes, cremains here in the inside of the altar. Eventually, we will have a place out somewhere where we can have a receptacle.
And then other things, maybe just bringing in terms of like that reverence to bring to something before you pass it on.
Yeah.
Before you open your hand to it without physically leaving it here.
Oh, you can leave it here too. Yeah.
How? I mean, that can't happen.
Why not? Well, maybe it's not time for it to go yet.
It's yard sale.
No, not yard sale. It's fire. That's where the fire comes in. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So there is, like I say, I mean, in a very practical sense, there is a art to that, a ritual art to how those are treated, and then there's some way of decomposition, whether that's fire or bearing, or there's the core elements are utilized to help them make their way into their next shapes.
Thank you.
And so, the three bodies of the Buddha, do we have that too?
So, just from a kind of like a classical description sense, that we develop the Sambhogakaya body through merit. So if you read in the sutras, the Buddha will say things like, I attained this body through countless kalpas of practice. So the Sambhogakaya body is a practice body. It's a body of the immeasurable body of merit that comes through practice. And the Dharmakaya body of Buddha is no one's. So we can't technically say that we have it. We are it, but we don't have it. And then the Nirmanakaya body of Buddha becomes our own direct practice of Buddha. When I say we receive the body of Buddha, we receive that body of Buddha as our body. It's not like we have our body and then some other body comes. It's like this body is the body of Buddha as we're practicing. So when we sit in Zazen, it's very common in Japan to say, one stick of incense is one stick of incense Buddha. And the reference there is the stick of incense is how you classically would time meditation. So it's a reference to time, how long it takes for one stick of incense to burn. So one stick of incense burnt is one stick of incense Buddha.
Hey, Joe.
Right?
This isn't really a question, it's more of a musing or a thought. But I feel like there is a question in here somewhere, I just can't quite put my finger on it. The course of the talk today kind of drew me back to previous talks I think you have given, where you have talked about the stuff of a human life as being not separate from the way, but the way itself. And that sort of mutual arising feels very present to me. Also in the in the discussion today around icon and image and the various sense gates and how we meet all of these things, and how how it's the best best word I can think of right now is advisable, but there's more to it. There's way more to it than that. To meet these things with some degree of reverence and respect, and honoring them instead of just letting them, oh, it's a thing, and I'm going to pass it by. And
yeah. See, that's exactly my point in terms of what the one of the things, at least, that the icon provides for us is a way to see which is not so centered in the subject-object dynamic, which is so oftentimes turning into consume or repel, ignore or try to get in my court, rather than the veneration or the appreciation or the respect with which we can meet things. And so this is uncomplicated. I've been saying very complicated things, but it's uncomplicated to simply come to things with that heart. One of my teachers in Japan, Itabashi Zenji, he used to really take issue with people who would make this remark that Japanese people are not very religious. Which, if you're in Japan, they're not. People are not very religious in the way that we typically think of religiosity in North America, and I think it's very confusing for people. It's a very modern, very modern country, so people interpret that as people have given up on their religious faith or something. You hear people say that kind of thing a lot. And Itabashi Zenji, he would always say, no, I don't believe that's true at all. He said, I've traveled all over the place, all over the world. And here in Japan, people don't talk a lot about it, but people come and they light one stick of incense and they place it in the brazier and they put their hands together. He said, that's my religion. And that always stuck with me because that very simple way of caring for something, when that something is formulated well, that something becomes a gateway to the rest of the world. That the way that I appreciate the Buddha on the altar becomes the way that I appreciate the thing that I'm cooking. It's the way I appreciate the flower, the way I appreciate the person I'm lined up behind in the supermarket, or whatever it is. It all becomes possible from that same heart.